Hello, Shirley Adams with the last show of the Sewing Connection Series 2, and I'd like to stretch it out and add a few more programs. Since that's not possible, we'll have to stretch by looking at various means of doing just that. All these garments that you're going to see have two things in common. They all incorporate stretch in some way, but a different type in each, and secondly, they're all made from the very same pattern, but slight changes in each disguise the obvious. For example, the first thing that you see on a model is this floral print jacket, and what's been different about it is that it had epaulets added at the shoulder, and it has wide sports elastic and a band at the waist and also at the wrists. The second thing that you see here, this big t-shirt outfit, has been color blocked, of course, but also the stretch that comes in this has come at the neck and at the hips and at the wrists. And this stretch is just by using ribbing, banding of the same fabric around instead of any extra elastic. Here's another jacket, this one in some very thin fabric, some chiffons, and to this, because it's so thin and because it's so drapey and soft, we've added a yoke and some gathers below that yoke to bring in some fullness because it's such a nice look on this thin floaty fabric. Also, because the fabric is so thin, it seemed appropriate to add narrow elastic at the wrists and at the waist to make these bands to draw it in closely. Here's a summer dress, and what's different about this summer dress is it's been made short sleeved and it's been made much longer, about 2 feet longer at the bottom, and had some big patch pockets added. But where the stretch comes in this is because it's always going to be worn belted, it would be a good idea to put a little elastic around that waist so the waistline won't move from time to time as it's taken on and off, or as one sits and stands and moves back and forth. Then this pink leather jacket, same pattern again. The epaulets make it look like a little yoke. A lot of top stitching done here because that looks just right on leather. It goes so well with it. And here we've added a pocket, an inseam pocket, but also we've made it a little bit longer, and we've added a stretchy band at the bottom. Again, sports elastic, but this time for a very good reason, and I'll tell you why later. We stitched right through that sports elastic. And then there's this gold lame top to wear for a good evening. And this top actually doesn't have any stretch in it, but it does have some other kind of interesting features. But anyway, they are all made from the very same pattern. Now, we're all very busy, and to use one pattern several times really saves time because we're familiar with it and needn't read directions after the first time. So let's get into it and see what we have here in stretch changes as well as pattern changes. First, that jacket that had the sports elastic in the waist. Now, what was a problem with this, I really had thought sports elastic is nice in that you can stitch right through it. Some of the old type elastics you couldn't. If you'd stitch through them, they'd lose their elasticity. They'd kind of stay stretched out. But this is a little bit different in that you can stitch through this. However, in order to stitch through it, what you're going to have that's different is something that's kind of small in the waist. Well, obviously, if this is big enough, this top is big enough for the bust, your waist is a lot smaller. That means there's a lot of fullness in this waist to be eased in, and so we can't stitch through this elastic because the elastic won't pull out big enough for the fabric to stitch it in. So I'll show you here what I mean on this cuff. This is the most I can stretch out this cuff, and you can see that it's still all gathery. There is just no way we can stretch this out completely straight and be able to stitch through it. So the way I did this, both at the waist and in the cuffs, was to have a piece of elastic here longer than I really needed it, and I marked that elastic where the end of it was going to be. For instance, if I start the elastic down at this end and over in this end of the band, and the other end of the band is going to come to this point, well, you can see I can't stretch out the elastic that far. I'll just put a line here so you can see it real easily. And I'll show you how you can stitch something of this sort so that it does work. This is just going to be some straight stitching, and actually all we're going to do is attach the elastic inside the band, and then as we're sewing down the other side of the band, we'll stretch it out a little. So I'll put a couple of pins here just to hold it. And once we have this held in place, maybe one more pin here so that I can go around the corner. Okay, after we have this now all held in place, I'm going to stitch through the end of the band just to secure it, and then we'll go down the other side. And again, anytime you're going to turn a corner, it's a very nice idea to have the needle in the down position, so I'll push it in the down position so it stops when I stop. Down in the fabric, and now I'm going to turn. And as I turn, I'm going to take a few stitches just to get going. And then after it gets going a little bit, I'm going to have to stretch that elastic out. So I'll take this pin out before I cross it. And I'll stitch, some more. While I have all this extra elastic down here, I might as well stretch a lot more, in fact. Stitch a lot more. I'll stitch all the way down here to the end. And then when I have this much stitched, I'm going to pull that elastic out while it's still here in the machine, because this is what you must do when you have more fabric than you have elastic. So when I have it pulled all down here in shape, and you can see here is the end that I had marked earlier. There's the end of the elastic with my marking on it. That's what I want to hit the end of the fabric. When I get it to that mark, then I will just go on to the corner and turn with the needle down in the fabric and stitch across the end. And after you have that done, and after you then pull it out, you can see that it distributes itself as you stretch that elastic out. The fabric distributes itself on the elastic. So this is what you must do if your fabric is larger than your elastic. Okay, we'll get into another one in a little bit that has the same size, and so we'll do a different technique there. Then we have another garment here. And this one's the t-shirt, and we didn't use any elastic in this. We used the natural stretch of the fabric instead in this t-shirt. And by doing that, this is how you figure out how much you need to use. I have both around the neck, I have a band, and also at the wrists and down in the hip area, all three places. Now, there are two different types of knit that you might put there. One is some ribbing that you buy that's just meant for that purpose, and then if you can't find that color in ribbing, you use self fabric, and if so, the measurements are going to be a little bit different. So here, for instance, down on the table is some ribbing, and here is the self fabric here next to it, and this is how you figure out how much you need. You measure whatever the t-shirt's going to be, and let's say this one is a little bit less than 15 inches here. So what we want in the same fabric, in the self fabric, which doesn't have quite as much stretch as the ribbing does, in that self fabric we want about 3/4 of that size. So if you're a mathematician, fine. If you're not and don't even want your brain to think about it, then you hold your finger right here where you measured the end of that fabric and fold up the edge of the tape measure to that point. I'll turn it around so that you can see what the point was. And then when it's folded up to that point, you fold this top end back until you get to this fold, and wherever the fold is here that I just made, that's how long that self fabric needs to be. So here it is, 11 inches long, which is what I needed for that 14.5-inch shirt I was going to make. If, on the other hand, I use that ribbing that has more stretch, then I'd need a 2-to-3 ratio instead, 2/3 of the size. So if my shirt, again, is up to here, almost 15 inches, 14.5, then I could just take 2/3 of that. Well, that's easy. Either divide the tape in thirds or 15 inches. We can all figure out 2/3 of that is 10 inches. So I have done this ribbing here so that it's 10 inches. So either one of these I could serge very easily to this band. I'll just take this one since it's closer, and I'm going to go over to the serger and show you how easy this is to connect. And this is good to do with 4 threads because you both sew the seam and you finish the edges, and it's all a little bit more sturdy than 3 threads. You can do it with 3 also, but since I have 4 of them here in the serger, I'll do it that way because it's possibly preferable. Now, don't think just because I show a serger that you can't live without one. Oh, I couldn't live without one. I'm used to one. But you actually can. You can do these same processes. They look different, of course, but you can do this on a sewing machine. And, of course, on a sewing machine, you would just do a couple lines of stitching, or you would do zigzagging, something of that sort instead. But you can see I'm just stretching out this banding so that it fits the shirt, and then we serge through it very quickly. And as I do this serging, I'm cutting off a little bit of the excess. Whenever you need to stop and adjust things, you just do that. And do not ever pull back or force anything through your serger in any way. You want to let it go at its own rate. I'm only stretching out the fabric, but I'm not forcing it through the machine. And then we'll just chain off here and cut this off, and you can see that this is all nicely ribbed, the same as the t-shirt was. So this is what was done on this particular t-shirt, and it works very well. The ribbing would have worked just as well, but this is what you do. This is the substitute when you simply can't buy ribbing that goes with it, whatever garment you're making, and must use self-fabric instead. So another little way to get stretch in whatever it is you're doing. Now this third one that I have here is a chiffon jacket. It's very lightweight. And because it is so lightweight, I did a couple of things. I changed the pattern I already told you. See how we put these gathers in here, a yoke, and put gathers down below? Well, to put those gathers and put that yoke in isn't all that difficult. Here's the front pattern piece, and I decided how low I wanted this yoke to go. I'll just turn this over so that it goes with the yoke. Okay, right here is where I decided I wanted this yoke to end. So what I did was fold my pattern here. I have a little dotted line where that fold was, and I only cut out this much of the fabric up here. I only cut out this much in one piece, and I added to that a seam allowance because you must sew the upper and lower pieces together. So you have to have an extra 5/8 beyond this, and this is the way that was done. And then for the lower part, while I was cutting this out, I added an extra 5/8 to it, so it would have a seam allowance. But instead of putting this right on the edge of the fabric, I moved it over. Instead of, for instance, putting this right at the front opening, I moved it over on the fabric, probably about 4 inches. And I cut it out so that this bottom piece was very wide, and that's why it had to be gathered up to be stitched into the yoke. So this is how you can change a pattern that easily, and just gather it up and put it in the yoke, and very simply you can do this process. Then, because it is such lightweight fabric, I thought it might be a good idea to do a different kind of elastic in this. So what I have done in here is have several channels, and through each of these channels there is a different piece of elastic. Now I have everything I make is an experiment, I must admit. I never know exactly what it's going to look like. And so since it's all an experiment, what I have inside these cuffs is 2 different types of elastic. One in one cuff and one in the other, and frankly you can't tell the difference by looking at them. I can tell the difference by feeling them because one's a little bit flatter than the other one, but other than that they both work beautifully. So here are the 2 types of elastic I'm talking about, and to make these channels both at the waist and also at the wrist, I first of all just made a big hem in that fabric. So I'm going to make that hem on machine here. And I've already pre-pressed this so that the hem's there, so it'll come in easily. And I'll put a couple of pins here just to hold it in place temporarily. And so I am going to make not one stitching line, but one for each little channel of elastic that I want there. So here's going to be one. And it's a good idea not to stitch over pins when you stitch with thin fabric especially. This machine isn't objecting, but you really ought to pull those out before you come to them. So here's one line of stitching, and then you do a separate channel for each line that you want. So I'll do another little line of stitching here. And I'm not going to make all these channels, I'll just do enough to tell you what it's all about or show you what it's all about. Okay, then I'd make a second line of stitching right here. and so on. You could do a couple more of them is what I did actually, about 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, lines of stitching I did, and then put 4 pieces of elastic through them. But I'll just show you how to put one piece. Now you could use the good old trusty safety pin if you wanted to pull the elastic through, or you might use one of the guides. You can find a lot of these guides in notions departments. And the 2 different types of elastic I have are some clear elastic, which looks like this. You can barely see it. It's clear, and it stretches very nicely. It doesn't seem to have any fibers at all. It's a solid piece of whatever, Elastex, I guess. Or there's the type elastic that you're more accustomed to seeing. Either one work well. I'm just going to use this one through the little guide because you can see it more easily. The other one's pretty much invisible. And because the other one is invisible, this would be a good reason to use it on completely see-through fabric. You wouldn't be able to see it's there and it would look nice. So we'll just pull this through the little channel here, and it comes out the other end. And as you pull this through and bring it out, you would have to do this with all those channels, and after you get all of them through, you'd secure both ends. So after I stitch all of this end on each of the channels that I've pulled through, then I'd want to pull the elastic out tighter, and after I have it pulled out tight, I could stitch the other end of all of them. So you'd use pins to hold it in place and do this stitching. But another very easy way to get that elastic in and to get some stretch in those cuffs. This is really kind of a big baseball jacket is what this is, but it can be a jacket, a blouse, an over blouse. It can change into so many things. So kind of a nice pattern to work with. So there was another option. Even though, by the way, these only button at the waist, I can also wear them as blouses because they overlap. They're double-breasted. They overlap considerably at the waist, about 6 inches. That means that it stays closed so that everything works out all right. Put a little pin there or something if you need to absolutely keep it in place. Then we have down here a summer dress. And with this summer dress, if I want some elastic around the waist, I have to know exactly where my waist is. I don't have it here because I haven't marked it yet. But I was telling you this on an earlier program, how it's a good idea, if you're always going to wear it belted, to put elastic on it. Now, if I wanted to wear this just as a shift sometime, that would be a good reason to not put elastic in it so that it would look fine just out straight without a belt. But if I'm always going to wear it belted, then I would put the elastic in. I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm still making that decision. Therefore, I don't have any elastic in at this point. I may never put any in. But if I would elasticize this waist, here's how I'd do it. I'd first put the dress on and put something tight around my waist, like a piece of elastic. Just tie it tightly around my waist and blouse the dress so that it looked just right. And after I had it bloused so that everything was hanging very nicely below my waist, remember that show I did, Hang from the Waist? So after I had it bloused nicely so everything would hang straight below that, then I would take a marker, a fabric marker that comes off the fabric. It won't be there permanently. But if I would mark this even on the right side of this fabric, more than likely it would show through a little bit to the wrong side. Yes, it does. Completely it shows through to the wrong side. And after I have that showing through on the wrong side, I'll just make a bigger mark all the way across this. And I'm going through blue, that might be a little bit more difficult. But after I have this showing through to the wrong side, what I'm going to do with this elastic is put it around my waist and cut it probably, depending on how much stretch there is, probably about 3 inches smaller than my waist is what I'd want to cut this, because this seems to be very soft and stretches a lot. So I'd probably cut it off about 3 inches shorter. And then after I have it cut off wherever that might be, I would pin one end to one side of the elastic, and I'd pin the other end to the other, or to the fabric, and I'd pin the other end of the elastic, let's say it stretches out to here, to the other side of the fabric. And then I'm going to zigzag right through this on the machine to attach this. And as I attach it, I'd have to push it up and down to meet that line so that it is right at my waist after I finish it and put it on. So to do that zigzagging, it would be like this. I'll just push the little button that makes it zigzag and do a little stitching here. As soon as I get a couple of stitches in, I can then remove that pin. Okay, there we have a couple of stitches, so I'll remove it now and just stretch things out so that they are taut and show you how easy this is to zigzag right through the elastic. Now here again, just as that first top that I showed you, if your dress is really full and your waist is really small, you won't be able to stretch this out completely all the way. So if that's the case, what you would then want to do is put a casing on. That's a piece of bias tape or whatever you could do for a casing, for a little tubing there at the waist that you could then later insert the elastic into. This is what you would do if the fabric is large and your waist is small. But as long as you can fit the elastic on the fabric, if you can stretch it out that big, then you're fine to just stitch it directly on. It'll show, of course, on the right side, but that's all right. If you're always going to wear a belt over it, it won't really make any difference. So, another way to incorporate some stretch. Then we have a jacket back here that's in progress. You've seen this a couple of times on the program. And this jacket that's in progress, I really will finish it. You will see it sometime in my next series, perhaps, but you will see it all finished. But what I've done with this, I showed you on the first program on the series, I showed you how to add this inseam pocket if you would like to have that. And then what I have done to this is just let it be long. I didn't fold anything under for the casings as I did on the other jackets, the other short things. This one I left it long. And here in the sleeves I've just left it long, and I'm not going to fold that up yet. Okay, then I made the lining and I attached that to a facing, and I showed that to you last program, I believe it was, when you saw how to put that facing and lining together. And I don't have it sewn in yet, but I do have just it slipped in there, and one sleeve comes through, so the lining sleeve is up here. And the lining sleeve is a little bit shorter than the outside jacket. And the reason for this, I already have a pressed mark here. Notice there's already a crease there where I've pressed it. This is where the cuff is going to turn up to here, and then the lining inside hangs down about here. Well, as I pin this together, I don't want to have that lining all the way down. Remember I showed you when I was doing linings how you always want some ease in that lining. You don't want it to be completely taut or it'll pull the sleeve up and look ugly. So I will pin this all the way around first so that I can pull the lining up and have some extra there. And then because this fabric doesn't ravel at all, I can, if I want to, either turn under this edge, or there's no reason why I can't just leave it out straight and stitch it down that way. So what I'm going to do with this is just stitch it down. I'm not going to take it over now to the machine because I need to first put the lining in, but I'm just going to stitch down all around the sleeve that way, and then I can put the elastic through later. Now what I have done in this, because I want to put elastic through later, notice on the seam that goes under the arm, on this I have stitched about a 1/4 inch right here at the bottom, and then the rest of the sleeve is all stitched, but I've left a big opening. And that opening is for this elastic that's going to be strung through here. It'll just fit right through that opening, and I can do that with a big guide, or else I can do it with a safety pin, whatever you can pull it through with. And when I get to the other end, I can just pull it all through here, and I'm going to, as I pull the other end through, I can do some stitching between the two pieces of elastic right here, and then they'll just tuck inside the cuff. What I've done to the bottom of it here is simply made a completely separate band because I want that jacket to be long. This comes down and covers my hips, covers a little extra because I'm going to wear pants with this, the same pink leather pants, and I thought I might be comfortable in a longer jacket with that. So this I found, the sports elastic does stitch through very nicely. So I've already stitched through some of it, but here's the rest of it, and you can see I have it pinned in place here so that it is all ready to go. And I'm just going to then stitch through the rest of this by stretching it out as I stitch through it. So here I'll start on this piece where I left off the last time. And whoops, I'm on zigzag. How about putting it on straight stitch? I'll just turn it off and on again so that I can get it on straight stitch. Okay, I'm going to back stitch here and then stitch forward. And because I really don't need small stitches here, I think I'll move them up a little bit and make them slightly larger. And then I'm just going to stretch this out and stitch right through that elastic. Now what I'm using as a guide is some marking on the throat plate, either side of it here, but do make sure that you stitch straight down the center of that by using one side or the other as a guide so that it comes out looking like a nice straight line when you're finished. When my arm is no longer going to fit, I will then stop it and pull out these pins and start over again, stretching it up here and going through. And just keep doing that. Now, what I love about the new elastics is that they do this so beautifully. They work so beautifully. The old elastics, I know you couldn't stitch through like this. You'd have no stretch left. You'd have a mess. But anyway, this is the idea. You just stitch through the whole thing, and then it's going to be sewn on the jacket. Now, the gold jacket that I had, didn't have any stretch, so I won't even tell you about that. Well, this also is the same pattern, again, no stretch, but this fabric was an impulse buy as I was leaving a shop. I really didn't care if it went with anything else or not. It's a jacket or a blouse with its own pants, but when I got it home, I discovered that it will mix and match with this pink leather outfit you see on the model. The rain parka, it goes with that nicely. It goes with the black suede skirt, just using it as a blouse or a jacket over it, or with the pants. Here's a green shag polar fleece jacket on top of the whole pantsuit, and that goes beautifully, perfect match. It can be a jacket over the silky pink party outfit, or it can go under the green ultra suede coat. Now, could you ever, in a million years, find such endless options in ready-to-wear? Of course not. This is why we all sew, because we love the choices, the challenges, the complete control it gives, the wonderful ways we can translate fashion into our own personal terms. This is the end of Series 2, and I've barely scratched the surface of what can happen in your sewing room. Next week, we start to explore some more new ideas in Series 3 of The Sewing Connection. Until then, this is Shirley Adams saying it's really been nice being with you. Remember that you can have whatever you want if you sew, because sewing is your connection with the world of fashion. Enjoy.